Well, hello everyone. It is so nice to be back again, hosting another episode of Lowdown on Low Code. My name is Dave Marcus. I've been in this low code space for what feels like forever, certainly way before the time that John, one of my colleagues that we'll introduce in a minute, and some of his colleagues at Forest even named this category. And so it is great to have you all here again. This particular podcast series has really been well accepted. We're trying to sort of get beyond the hype, particularly beyond the hype of everything that's going on in the sort of crazy AI world these days as well. We are trying to sort of get back to reality. As many of you know, we've traditionally taken an approach for a while of providing our context on something specific. And then that led to doing a whole bunch of work with a particular set of vendors. And then we got a lot of feedback to say, hey, let's hear from some end customers or practitioners actually engaging to what they're doing and how they're trying to scale the adoption of technologies like this. A couple of weeks ago, you probably saw that we showcased what Shell are doing. And we are really, really happy to have another guest on today. I'll have John introduce him to you. And so, as always, please comment on our LinkedIn posts, provide our feedback, go to our website. We've actually just uploaded a new set of content, so go and take a look there and give us some feedback, whether that be on LinkedIn, on our YouTube channel, or just by adding a comment on our website as well. John, let me hand over to you, and it's always good to see you and have you introduce our guest for today.
Thank you, Dave. Great to be with you here on the podcast as well. My name is John Rymer. I am an analyst here at analysis.tech, along with Dave and Rob Koplowitz and others. My background was primarily as an analyst, spent 17 years at Forrester. And as Dave mentioned, the last bit of my time at Forrester was spent mostly studying the low-code market, which my colleague Clay Richardson and I you can blame us for coming up with that name. Anyway, I'm very excited today to introduce Simon Owen, who at the current time is with Avanade and running a practice to help organizations scale up what's commonly known as citizen development. And previously, Simon has experience at GSK. He's Simon, I think of you as one of the sort of select few that have actually done this, and you've actually organized a program that empowered business people to actually self-serve for the automation and software that they need. And so we're thrilled to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us. I'll hand it over to you. Maybe introduce yourself a little bit more and tell us about how you got here. What's your journey, Simon?
Yeah, it's like all good superheroes, and I've got a backstory. So let me take you. I'm going to do it in kind of a Quentin Tarantino style, I think, and I'll jump into the action, and then I'll go back and tell you the backstory. So in short, I am a Power Ranger. So I'm gonna tease you with that as the exciting hook to kind of draw you into the story. And let me rewind a little bit and tell you how I became a Power Ranger then. So, as you said, I'm at Avanade at the moment. I've been here for just over 3 years now, and I'm part of the Global Power Platform Center of Excellence. And what that means is that I support the rest of the organization and try and make them as successful as possible. And what that focus area for me is really about helping to establish the governance and guardrails to help an organization to be safe, secure, and give them that scalable platform to move forward on. But I also focus on that enablement and adoption part as well. And like you said, I've got a bit of an interesting background, I think, compared to a lot of other people that I know throughout the industry now. So before I like to say before the consultancy at Avanade, I had a real job. I worked for a proper company because I worked in pharmaceuticals for 16 years with GSK, and that was all sorts of different things. So it gives me a different perspective, I think, than a lot of people. So my journey at GSK started as a manufacturing operator. I was helping make tablets really close to the medicines. So those medicines were for oncology, they were for HIV, they were for real serious illnesses. And as a result, we were one of the most important factories within the GSK network, and about 25% of the revenue for the organization went through that one site in terms of medicines. So from that view, I could see the pain of old paper processes, manual transcription, kind of forcing things through a system. And my career evolved to a point where actually I could do something about it. So I went from that manufacturing operator position into a leadership position, then into a data management position using SAP and really doing the master data management behind the setup of how we ran the factory. Then moved into process improvement, so looking across a broader suite of platforms and processes to say, well, where are the opportunities? And that led me into the IT organization. And I spent about 10 years or so in IT, initially as the IT service manager for that location, then as the IT lead and parts of the senior leadership team, setting strategy, looking at where we needed to align to deliver the business goals. And then the last 3 years of that is how I became a Power Ranger. So we had a digital transformation program that we were calling the Digital Factory. So that factory had been there for over 100 years. So you can imagine that there were some real old legacy processes, but because we were a new product introduction site, there were also some state-of-the-art pieces of equipment and manufacturing lines and processes as well. So we were looking at, what does the future look for a factory? What could we do? And these were things like workflow tooling. It was about trying to capture people's knowledge, tacit knowledge, and putting it into AR and VR models to help people train faster and understand things better. And one of the things that I accidentally stumbled into at one stage was the Microsoft Power Platform. So we were primarily a Microsoft house. We had all the standard tools, and suddenly I found that we had Power Apps, Power Automate, or Flow as it was back then, and Power BI. And I thought, these look interesting. I don't quite know who should be using them, where we would use them, where the value is, what we should and shouldn't be doing. Let's experiment. So that's where the Power Rangers were born. So it started with an email. Like, I don't know if all good stories do, but this this one did. And I identified 8 other people. So these were folks across business roles. So they were in health and safety, they were in product development, they were in warehousing, they were in manufacturing, they were in labs. And I started that very first message. We were talking Power Apps, Power Automate, Power BI. So hello, Power Rangers, and just threw it out there as a bit of a joke. But it actually turned into a brand. It turned into something that grew across the organization from those 8 people who were brave enough to start experimenting with me. And by the time I left 3 years later, there were 4,500 Power Rangers across 70 countries, with visibility and celebration happening right up to C-suite. So it was an incredible, life-changing story that still kind of carries on today.
Wow. Thank you, Dave. Over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Simon, can you just talk a little bit about sort of you kicked off the sort of initial part of this, but while you were at GSK, beyond these initial people, how did you sort of get to the point where those 8 eventually became the 4,000? And, what did it take to do that? A lot of the time people get very caught up in you have to have cool technology, and it is very useful to have good technology that does help with this. But ultimately, at the end of the day, 8 doesn't just naturally become 4,000 without putting a ton of work into it. And so, give us a little bit of a feel for sort of what created this sort of groundswell, the drive, and some of the things you had to put in place to get there.
Yeah, cool. So it was really interesting, actually. So I think I think one of the big things to confess was that in those early days, I was pretty much making it up as I went along. I didn't know how to do this stuff. I hadn't met anybody else who had. I didn't know any other organizations who were also using the platform. But we had this growth mindset. We were running this transformation program with an agile mentality. So we were trying to experiment, fail fast, and grow. I thought, well, let's try it. And it might be that we have one meeting, we get together, and then that's it. We don't know what to do with it. We park it. We come back maybe in the future. So the structure that I started with was just a weekly meeting. It was just getting together for an hour, and there wasn't really any agenda. But what I tried to instill in that group was that spirit of adventure, that exploration, that we don't know where to use this or what we should be doing with it. Let's experiment a little bit. These were people who were kind of more, they were generally part of the graduate intake. So they were earlier on in their career, but they knew their data, they knew their processes, they knew the pain points in their part of the organization. And so every week they would go off and they would be experimenting, building an app or visualizing some data or trying to automate a task. And then we would come together that 1 hour a week and they would say, look, I made this really cool thing. And we'd all get excited and all wanted to learn from them how to do it. But equally, not everything worked either. That was the early days of the platform. So we hit barrier after barrier and constraint against constraint. And together we broke those down. We tried to solve the problems collectively. We celebrated collectively. We learned collectively. And we just took that iterative approach. And what we found by doing that was actually more people wanted to know what we were doing. So these folks would talk to people in their areas. They would show them the tools that they were building. They'd want to come along and build those tools as well. And it organically grew in that one location to start with. And I think we got up to maybe 25, 30 people. And at that stage, it became visible to the site leadership team. But before that, it was kind of under the radar. We weren't really sure if we should be doing it or what we should be doing. They could have gone two paths. So one path could have been, stop doing this. You're not doing what we would usually do. Let's squash it. But actually, we had a really progressive site director, so a VP who looks after that whole site. And he pulled us into the main boardroom, the meeting room, with some of his leadership team and said, I've got a challenge for you. So here on this slide are 10 big problems for the site that I think these tools and you can help us break down. So it was really exciting to get that kind of recognition. Oh, we are doing something interesting, of value and exciting. So internally, in that kind of physical location, it continued to grow. But equally, we were using internal social media at the time as well. So we had Workplace by Facebook. And I started a group, a Power Rangers group in there. And that organically started to grow. And I thought, there's something here. I want to grow this. I want to make it bigger and bigger and bigger until either we have to put the formality in place and really invest in this and focus on it, or I'm going to get told, no, this is enough, you're out. So it was a little bit of a gamble. So the way that I went about that was to then proactively try and market some of this stuff. And today, kind of social media stars, the folks creating YouTube videos and all these languages that I don't even understand with Gen A's now, they're doing this stuff. They're influencers. They're putting TikTok videos out there. Essentially, that's the same process as we did. So put out little teasers, trying to hook people in, lay breadcrumbs from other groups so that they would come and explore what we were doing. Look for opportunities that the same platform and the same learning could help other people, direct them back to our site, and just grow the membership that way. So yeah, it was really exciting at the time.
Very cool.
Very cool. What was in that meeting? The meeting in the big conference room with the big boys. What was IT's attitude, Simon? Because essentially, the site manager could have said, IT, we need you to solve these problems. But no, he put it to you guys.
Yeah, well, I was at that stage when I was in the digital transformation program. I'd stepped out of the IT lead role into leading that from an IT perspective. So I was the IT voice
Oh, okay.
in that.
Okay. Okay. Um, one of the questions that comes up all the time when we talk about this phenomenon of business people involved in software is, how do you recognize these folks? And you call them Power Rangers, which I love that story because it just kind of came off the top of your mind and the top of your tongue, and it actually stuck. Some people um, struggle with what to call them, and one of the concerns is the term developer. Do
Yeah.
a lot of business people say, no, 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 I'm not a developer. Don't ever call me that. That's an insult or whatever. So I'm curious. Did you find? I'm curious. Did you find that there were certain profiles, certain folks? You mentioned that age was a bit of a factor in the beginning, and you mentioned the knowing the data and the processes. But were there other characteristics where you saw someone or someone came to a meeting and you said, "That's there's a Power Ranger." On the other hand, that's not a Power Ranger. I can tell that person's going to struggle and is probably not good for this role. Anyway, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I, from the very beginning, I thought all of us started from zero knowledge. So my start point was that this could be just super inclusive. We shouldn't exclude anyone. Anyone who
Mhm.
has an interest, doesn't matter whether it's your
Mhm.
native skill set or whether you're learning for the first time. You never, or not never, touched a computer, but is at a really base level of knowledge. That's where I drew the line, and I didn't. I wanted to make Power Rangers an inclusive thing. It wasn't like a big grand fancy title that you would hold up and necessarily boast about. It's just what we were.
Mhm.
Um, and even at the time, I didn't. When we first started, I didn't know there were other people like us out there. It's almost like the X-Men backstory, I guess. That over time, I got connected into Microsoft. I got connected into this big, really friendly, supportive community that's out there around these tools. And only through that, I thought, oh, there's more people like us. There's other organizations who are doing similar stuff. And Alan Chai from Schlumberger is a really key one. He's like my superstar in this world. We both kind of came up through the Microsoft world around the same time, and he's doing amazing things. And he may be another guest for you actually in the future. He's got a great story to tell. Um, but
Duly
but
noted.
yeah, good.
Thank you.
That's all right. So really, I didn't get hung up on the title too much. Certainly not the developer, Power Ranger, citizen developer. It wasn't really a thing, but
Mhm.
it's become something more. I think certainly over the last couple of years, there's certainly a movement, I think, from Microsoft to move away from the term citizen developer. Um,
Mhm.
there's a kind of a dropping of the developer name, and business technologist is a really good way that some of these folks have been described, that they're a bit more technical than the base level of business person. But I try not to get too hung up on this. I think where we are today, and certainly going forward, I think these tools are so accessible to so many people that if I fast forward, I don't know, in my dream state it would be 5 years, but perhaps it's a bit longer. That if I went to work and I wanted to type a document, I might use Word. If I wanted to do some analytics, some tabulation of data, maybe some formulas, I'd use Excel. If I wanted to gather some data across my team, well, perhaps I'd just naturally spin up a Power App and I'd put that in place. If I wanted to automate some processes, I'd know that Power Automate was the thing, or an equivalent tool. And that's, I think, the journey that we're on at the moment, and it's a really exciting journey.
Yeah.
And even 6 years ago, when we started started on this journey at GSK, it wasn't quite as easy then. It was a bit more difficult. Not so many things worked as well as they did today. But even so, I think how we attracted those earlier people, they were the folks who were already messing around in Excel. They were already doing some stuff with formulas. They were kind of a bit more analytical in the way that they thought and perhaps the roles that they were doing. And I think if I reflect on it, a lot of them were kind of a bit more disruptive. They wanted to make change. They wanted to make a difference. So I think that's some of the elements I would characterize a Power Ranger as.
Thank you. That's awesome. We're going to take a quick moment here for a shameless self-promotion. Folks, you're watching Lowdown on Low Code. This is a weekly podcast from analysis.tech. If you like the content, check out the other podcasts that we have put out, the other podcast episodes. Give us a like on your favorite social platform. We're on YouTube is a great way to consume the podcast. Give us a like, make a comment, and come visit us at analysis.tech. We are a analysis and research firm completely devoted to advancing the low-code journeys of clients. So thanks for listening. Dave, over to you.
Awesome. So Simon, this is really helpful to get a perspective on how it all came about. When you think about an initiative like this, both in terms of your experience at GSK as well as what you're doing working with clients at Avanade right now, or with some of your colleagues, how do you find what type of solutions lend themselves to be best delivered by this class of, you call it business technologists? So let me use that. And I guess, we see everything from people can kind of self-service these applications, but then you get to a point where there's a level of complexity that no longer makes it such that makes sense for lots of different reasons, versus something that may be very complex at the beginning, that where, this idea of sort of fusion teams becomes more interesting. And so, how did you deal with this notion of, on the one hand, application utility, self-service, complex scenarios, and then also, as well as that, sort of duplication of effort, so you don't end up having 50 people creating the same thing?
Yeah, it's a common problem and a common conversation that I have with a lot of clients. So the way that I approached it back then, and then brought into Avanade and formalized and industrialized and then scaled, was really to be led by the use case. So think about it in terms of risk. So what I do is to try and categorize, working and defining these with the client, is define, well, what would a small level of risk look like in a solution? What would a medium look like? What would a large, and perhaps an extra large? It's just a start point. Sometimes there's 3, sometimes there's 5. It depends where they are and what they want to how they want to segregate it. But the way that I look at risk in that context is, there's going to be some risk around the data, so data classification, data sensitivity, maybe the complexity of the data model, the number of rows. There's going to be something around risk of financial risk. So it might be as simple as licensing, but it might be the outputs or the outcomes that these solutions drive. There may be financial benefits associated with those. Kind of connected to that, business criticality. So every organization will have some form of categorization around business criticality. So aligning to that to say, well, the higher the criticality, the more robustness we need around the governance model. But all of these are kind of tech agnostic. It doesn't matter whether it's Power Apps, doesn't matter whether it's Mendix, OutSystems, whatever. But what I've tried to do and what I've implemented with a few customers is to say, well, it doesn't matter what your low-code platform are. Let's talk about the individual use case in business terms wherever possible, and then we'll translate that into, well, what does that mean? So it gives us a way to talk in a common language to define those levels of risk, and then we make decisions. So for a small level of risk, we might be comfortable that we're able to lock down the configuration of the platform. So it's perhaps just the Office connectors in the case of Power Platform. and you can only share with a certain number of people. So we try and really pin down that risk level to as low as possible. And the converse of that is, if we can minimize the risk, we can open it up to more people and empower them to solve their own problems in that space. But the other end of the spectrum, if we're creating something that's organization-wide, or it's going to severely impact our KPIs at an organization level, or our reputation, or it's going to stop manufacturing lines, we don't necessarily want everybody to be making those things. So we need the robustness then that we have across our IT organization and our standard processes to go through those same things. So we need architecturals to say, yeah, that's the right platform, or no, actually, you should be using SAP or Salesforce or whatever one of your core business systems is. But if it's right, well, let's take it through architectural review boards, design authorities, security reviews, make sure that we've got the right documentation and support teams and all of that stuff that we would do for any other important system. So that's the framework that I look at this in. And then one lens on that is who should those developers be? So at that lower risk end, yeah, citizen developers are perfect. They're close to the problem. There's little business risk. There's lots of benefit, both for the solution that they build, because it's going to save them time, or it's going to enable something that they couldn't do. But actually, if we broaden out that perspective of value, there's value to them importantly, kind of as individuals. They're learning, they're developing this digital mindset on how they solve problems. They're equipping themselves for the future. They might be kind of building their own career path as the organization recognizes these things. And I've seen it time and time again that people have moved it up and through organizations and even out of organizations, building their career as they go on the basis of those first tiny little experiments that they've done and those tiny little solutions that they've built.
Well, arguably, you've progressed and gone up and out. Yeah, that's a great point. This focus on risk, I think, is so important, Simon. And one of the big questions is, what is the best role for IT to play in this movement? I think of it as a movement, and how should they empower but also advise communities like the Power Rangers? And it sounds like risk is the core of it, because if the IT pros really are doing their job, they really understand very well security risk, data leakage, scalability, reliability. I mean, all these we used to call them the illities. So it seems like that's at the core of it. But what other things have you learned about IT playing a productive role, I guess, in this, do's and don'ts?
So I think what you pulled out, there's some real key bits there, and for me, the strengths that the IT organization bring is this knowledge of how to develop proper, important solutions at scale and sustain them and make sure that they carry on doing what they need to do for as long as they need to do it in a reliable way. The kind of flip side that I don't know if they always know at the moment, but if I think about what they necessarily aren't traditionally good at, is the people enablement part, because they've not had to be before. So the way that I look at it is kind of, there's a center of excellence element, which is more around the technical pieces and establishing the platform, making sure that we've got the right BAU processes in place, that we're kind of evolving it and providing what the developers need. But there's a center for enablement part that's generally, it's more the kind of change management part. And for me, that's closer to the business. So recognizing that it's this partnership that will make them both successful, I think is that kind of golden nugget that needs to be searched for. And it's not always clear. So a lot of the conversations that we have with organizations, that initial steer comes from them finding out this stuff is going on and thinking, oh no, what do we do? What do we got out there? So there's an element of fear. There's an element of trying to put your arms around it and understand what's there and lower that risk. And then the next step often comes from, okay, well, now we're safe. We're a bit calmer now. How do we start getting more value out of this? And they see some of their peers and some of the other organizations getting that value. So there's some ideas on how to do that, but actually executing at scale, I think still isn't. I see some really good examples, and I spoke to a customer just this week who are in an amazing place, and they've thought about a lot of this, and they've got some real good structure. They're growing it really well, but still they know that they haven't got all of the answers. So they're looking at how do they take it to the next level. But I think that first step is probably the key one. And I was thinking on the fly a little bit then, because I think there's different ways you can do it. So there's a traditional change management type approach, as if you're trying to roll it out to the organization, like you might do with a Teams rollout or a SharePoint Online rollout, where everybody's going to feel it and be impacted. But for me, this is a bit different. We're not expecting the whole world to be developers. They can be if they want to be. But for me, this is an opt-in change, which is quite different to how we often do change management in big organizations. I think that's the thing that's different. And I think what some organizations like Shell are doing really well to encourage people to come in and be brave and take that first step and follow that same path that your colleagues have gone on. All that kind of stuff is the exciting bit for me.
Opt-in, that's a great point. Dave, over to you.
So Simon, often we get to a stage where, and you made this point earlier, you get to a point where there's a level of visibility by people in the organization, and sometimes these initiatives get to the point where there's a level of visibility by the people who actually have the money. And so I'll use at the highest level, if a CFO of an organization is starting to look at this and saying, where is the benefit? And how do I know that the money that I'm spending, I'm actually getting an appropriate outcome for? Because it's easy to play around with a bunch of technology, that may include some level of efficiency, but efficiency doesn't always translate to the things that a CFO cares about. And so as you go through the process of both the work you did at GSK and the advisory work that you're doing at Avanade right now, how do you think about laying down the foundation for some level of return on investment for these technologies?
Yeah, so I try and look at this and position this in the most holistic way that I can. So if we think broader, if we just think about citizen developers, we'll get so far and that conversation will go so far. And it's interesting, but unless people are really, really passionate about it or really see the difference within their own areas, it's quite a slow burn. So it takes a while to build that. But if we think more holistically, that these platforms, they're great at empowering people to solve those small problems, but they're actually really advanced. They can solve the big problems too. So if we think holistically about that scope of problems and who might be solving them, if we can find some really big ones that have clear financial return on investment, then that starts to justify some of the financial investment in the licensing models and the teams that need to look after it and the support and perhaps the development costs as well. So I think the more of those we can find a nice big backlog to generate the dollars or the pounds or the euros, I think that softens the blow. That's kind of the way in to talk about, well, how do I land this at scale across the organization? But actually thinking about who's interested in that citizen developer end. CFO might be, if we can say, well, you've got 100,000 people and maybe 1,000 or 2 or 3 or 5 are going to be developers. They're going to be creating these small solutions. We're going to capture the value of those and time saved. And over a year, that's going to mount up to a lot of hours saved, and that's going to have an equivalent dollar price. But if we think about it in terms of maybe the business areas, building capability and attracting talent and wanting to retain people and give people interesting work to do, and the crossover with that into the HR organization and some of the goals that they're likely to have, what I do when I'm having this conversation is to think, well, okay, Microsoft have got a sales model called Rooms of the House, where you think about some of these different functions across an organization and think about, well, what's important to them. And I quite happily stole that model and thought about, well, what are the types of value that might sit in those rooms of the house, and how might I align how I describe value from the Power Platform to somebody in HR, or to somebody in procurement, or to somebody in research, or whatever that audience might be, because they all view value in slightly different ways.
Yep.
And then once you package it up like that, you're addressing the financial concerns, and hopefully you've got enough of those good use cases that provide that financial return on investment. And then all this other value stuff you get for free. So for me, that's the real organizational transformation and people transformation and cultural transformation stuff that a lot of organizations are looking for, but perhaps don't quite know how to unlock. I don't think a lot have realized what opportunity there is here at the moment.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really, really interesting point. I mean, we've seen this over the years that, simple things like, if you have a younger group of people that are coming to an organization, they expect a set of technology utility that is very different from someone who is 50, 60 years old in the company. And if you're not facilitating that type of thing on their behalf, then the reality is they may just go elsewhere to go and find it. Just simple things like those culturally become really important for thinking about technology investments like these. John, back to you.
Yeah, great, really great points. Couldn't agree with you more, Simon. AI is is on everybody, tip of everybody's tongue these days, and in whatever, and include we've had people tell us that generative AI is going to kill low code. There's going to be no need for it anymore. We don't believe that at all. We think generative. I think it's actually rather silly, but generative AI certainly appears to us to have the potential to really supercharge the empowerment of business people to actually participate in the automation strategy. I wonder how you feel about it, and what your experience is with it, because the features are becoming available really widely. And I wonder what your experience is telling you about the potential here.
Yeah, I'm with you completely. I think saying that I can see why they may phrase it in that way, because it's that kind of clickbait, contentious headline phraseology, isn't it?
Right.
But actually, for me, they go hand in hand. The journey that we've been on with low code, the principles behind it, the way that we can grow adoption and encourage people to use it, it's exactly the same. If we've learned that lesson from using low code, we should be set up really strongly for then helping people see how they adopt AI and those AI technologies, and then grow value from that. And I think if I reflect on the last 6 years or so that I've been in the low code space, it wasn't all that smooth to start with. It was kind of clunky. You had to be quite persistent sometimes. You had to go and find your answers and work together with your peers and your colleagues and your community to find some of those answers. But for me, some of the fun was that perseverance and overcoming the problems. But I can see that that's also perhaps that activation energy. The barrier was too high for others because they may have tried and thought, oh, this is too hard, I'm not going to do this. Now, what AI does is just lowers that bar further and further down so that it will get to that stage. And it's pretty good in places at the moment, but it's getting better and better every day, where I can use natural language to just communicate with it and describe what I want it to do, and it will go off and do it. And even so, some of there's been some announcements from a Microsoft perspective this week, because there's a community Power Platform conference in Vegas, and some of the announcements there. So it's not just about how we use the tools or what AI we put into the tools to access the data, but it's thinking about that whole approach as well. So how do we use AI to make sure we're solving the right problems, that we're delving into it in the right way, that we're helping shape it so that we're creating the right tools to solve those things. So for me, it's just getting more and more exciting. There's so much opportunity to really unleash this, to be that tool that I was describing at the beginning that is just ubiquitous, and it's just part of how we work.
Thank you, Simon. Dave, over to you.
Brilliant. Simon, as always, this has been a really great discussion to have. We could talk to you for a long time, and we probably will ping you again and pick your brain on a couple of topics. But certainly, I'd like to thank you for the time today. Hopefully, everyone finds it super helpful. If you have, let us know. If you have specific topics you'd like us to cover in future, let us know that as well. We're always keen to kind of take feedback and know that we're focused on the right thing. Again, to everyone, thank you so much for the time, and we will catch you all online. Jake, I think we are good to go.